This interview is part of our Road to IGF series. You can find the rest by clicking here. So takes players to vast cities bathed in darkness, having players unveil their presence, histories, and story with light. Thomas Sharp, the actor at Gossamer Games, spoke to Gamasutra about their powerful student project, talking about the challenges of telling a story with place, how the game captures their own feelings as new artists, and how it captures a long mind like joy. My name's Tom Sharp, and I am the director of Gossamer Games on Solo, outside of a handful of small class projects. Solo is my first full game production. I got my undergraduate degree in game production at Drexel University, and was lucky enough to be one of the first students accepted into an experimental game incubator called the Entrepreneurial Game Studio. There, I was given the freedom, time, and team to develop my creative vision for Gossamer. Because we had not yet formed a strong creative direction for the studio, the concept started incredibly weak. We began with the imagery of carving through darkness as the foundation for the project's visuals and gameplay design. But, through years of iteration, we began to develop a more focused vision for the message we wanted to communicate in Solo, and what started as a top-down mobile strategy game evolved into a full 3D adventure game. Our goal at Gossamer is to create games that reflect upon our own important life experiences and capture those feelings through gameplay. As a brand new team of artists, there is a ton of uncertainty and doubt about where to go and what to do with our lives. So, we decided to create a game about wandering through the dark and being lost in a mysterious world. But somewhere along the way you develop a sense of direction, and everything starts to make sense, which is a perfect reflection of the team's experience discovering our creative direction and artistic voice. We created the game in Unity, and used mode for our dynamic soundtrack implementation. We also use a handful of great assets such as reward that make cross-platform development much easier. We have spent a lot of time designing and testing environments that feel vast and open while ensuring that players are not ever frustrated by the lack of direction. So many games let you know your objective right up front and are built around the dexterity challenge of overcoming enemies or obstacles. Finding the balance between gameplay that feels open and mysterious versus frustrating or boring is a super tricky line to walk. One of the hardest challenges in making Solo has been figuring out how to tell our story without any real characters or dialogue. The primary objective of the story is to raise questions rather than provide direct answers, and our hope is that every player walks away with a different interpretation of the world. Because there are no characters or text to communicate the story, it puts a lot more emphasis on the environmental design of the world. Every area of a level has to have a reason to exist, both in the gameplay and narrative. We spent a huge amount of time talking about what narrative questions certain locations would address and how we could express the backstory of the civilization by what is and is not in the world. From the very beginning, we noted that the act of exploring had to have an interesting hook to stand alone as the game's core mechanic. The satisfying visual effect of painting with light that illustrates your progress through the world feels hypnotic and expressive. It's always interesting watching some players methodically combing over the levels to reveal every last corner, while others go straight to the key locations. I think it definitely scratches the same itch as mowing a lawn or vacuuming a room. Sony is expanding its PlayStation also to new territories across Europe later this year. Players in Spain, Italy, Portugal, Norway, Denmark, Finland and Sweden will still have access to the subscription service, which provides a wide variety of games, from the PS4, PS3 and PS2 eras. PlayStation Now initially launched in North America back in 2014, launching in certain parts of Europe in 2015, including the UK, Germany, France, Belgium, Netherlands, Switzerland, Austria, Luxembourg, and Ireland, as detailed in a blog post. Players from these territories are invited to register for the PS Now beta to provide their feedback, which is slated to begin in early February. It's worth noting that this is a PS4 only beta. PC users will have to wait a little longer to be able to access the service. The Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, and Wells Fargo Securities said in a joint court filing yesterday that they have agreed to settle a lawsuit over 38 studios. The studio, known for developing in Dawn of Amulet, Reckoning, was founded by former Boston Red Sox pitcher Cody Schilling and shut down back in 2012 after running out of money, and has been the subject of a long-running legal battle with the state. Final approval has been delayed due to the current government shutdown. But lawyers for both parties asked a federal judge to put the case on hold until after the shutdown is over, to give the second's relevant divisions on Odyssey's time to consider and approve the settlement in principle. As reported by the Boston Herald, details of the PROPOSCDSCTTLDNENT have not been disclosed. Schilling moved the company from Massachusetts to Rhode Island in 2010 after the Rhode Island Commerce Corp agreed to give the studio a $75 million loan guarantee. The SEC said Wells Fargo and the Commerce Corp allegedly failed to disclose that 38 studios needed at least $75 million, but would receive only $50 million of proceeds from the bond offering, leaving a $25 million gap. The complaint filed in 2012 claimed that many of the defendants knew or should have known, but failed to inform the ADC board that 38 studios was destined to fail according to 38 studios on financial projections. 38 studios filed for bankruptcy less than 2 years after the move, prompting investigations and lawsuits into the company. Video game development teams have always been known for being multidisciplinary, conformed by people from different departments. Learning to communicate and understand each other is a continuous work in progress. However, there might be external collaborators who are not always around, and communicating with them is even more complicated, such as the tale of musicians versus developers. In our studio, we do not have any kind of sound designer, nor composer, so when we are developing a project, we have to rely on a professional studio, just like we did on Mucho Taco, where we found allies with Soundscape Studio. The musical composition of a game differs with that of any other piece of media, and it is wise to keep in mind the following considerations. All these considerations were shared with Soundscape when we showed them the project and the art we had of it. They also played the demo version of the game. We shared some music tracks from different media, TV shows, movies, games, that we thought could serve as inspiration. Using that information as a reference, the Soundscape team built different inspirational pieces to find the core concept for what would later become the main theme for the game. Here's one of them. You can listen to the tracks on the link at the bottom. Once both our teams settled on a melody, we'd explain to the musicians how the tracks had to be exported. Communication between the programmer and the musician was going to be an arduous task. So I realized we would most definitely need a diagram to visually represent the game flow and the exact moment where each track should be played. I started to build my own nomenclature so programmers and musicians could understand each other, and the result, after some iterations, was this. Complementary information for music frames displays the intro and outro behaviors of a track frame. A theme frame. For example, this is the music diagram for Mucho Topo as main theme. A theme frame that loops indefinitely, which is composed of another theme frame and a track frame. Idle song, flute song, normal song. You can listen to the tracks on the link at the bottom.